In DC Comics, there's only one villain that the Joker fears, and you guys are going to see why. It's not going to be ambiguous like the villain the one above all fears. No, this is pretty straightforward. So what this does is this initially picks up with almost a repeat of The Laughing Fish. For those of you guys who don't know, that was from Steve Englehart's Joker. Only lasted about 7 issues, 469 to 476, but a lot of stuff from that run, as short as it was actually carried over into Batman the Animated Series. The Laughing Fish was the storyline where the Joker tried to copyright fish after making them look like himself, as crazy as that was. Batman ends up figuring out that some red-belly piranha had gone missing. When he catches up to everybody, he realizes that it's a Joker scheme. But as soon as he opens this truck, he's immediately attacked by the Joker. And for the most part, Joker knocks him into the water, where he's just attacked by all these red-bellied piranha. Now, Batman even goes so far as to kind of illustrate what some of his safeguards are, right? Where he says that if anybody were to try to remove his cowl against his will by forcing it or anything else, they would either receive a face full of tear gas or a jolt of 300 milliamps. And that's exactly what happens to these fish. But it also happens to Batman, right? He electrocutes himself in the process. And then he's rescued by Talia al Ghul. But what ends up happening before any of that is you switch over to the Joker. And the Joker ends up coming across this guy named Silence. Now, this is not the villain that the Joker fears, but this guy doesn't really seem to say anything per se. He almost just kind of emits this pulse, this sonic pulse of sorts, which actually is almost like hearing words spoken inside your head, like a kind of telepathy, but it literally destroys the eardrums of the Joker, leaves him just reeling in pain, and then he's just carried away with nothing but a shoe left behind. Now, as far as Talia al Ghul goes, this is when stuff kind of goes off the rails, to be honest with you guys, right? You'll see why this story is really one of the most divisive stories in the modern era as we get further and further into this. But Talia al Ghul and Batman have a very lengthy history together. She basically violated him, right? Keeping it family friendly to a degree, which led to Damian Wayne. And then of course, there's always the kind of on again, off again. They've been lovers and friends and enemies and allies and pretty much everything in between. And that's when Batman asks her, how in the world did you find me? And that's when he kind of answers his own question and saying, you were tracking me. And she's just kind of in the same way that you let other people track you. And so she just kind of tells him, I came to visit Damian and I have more than a passing interest in the health of his father. You almost died tonight. I cannot have that. Remember, the greater number of people who believe in you, the more there are to be disappointed in you. And he asked the question, where's the Joker? Because the last thing he saw was the Joker kicking him into the water. Suddenly Talia al Ghul is there. And it's not that far outside the realm of possibility for someone like Talia al Ghul to kidnap the Joker for her own ends. So it's not an unreasonable conclusion for Bruce Wayne to draw. But that's when you get to the guy that the Joker's terrified of, because it's Hush, and Hush is returned. More so than that, right? Where Joker wasn't previously afraid of him, Hush is different now. There's something about him that's just so much darker than it used to be. Because what he does is he tells the Joker, I doubt you can hear me. The damage to your eardrums is incapacitating. The man you encounter tonight has a very unique gift. He goes by many names, but I prefer silence. I have found in life, when you want someone to listen to you, to actually comprehend your intent, you do not raise your voice. Quite the opposite. You lower your voice and it draws them in. But while he's doing all of this, he's effectively torturing the Joker, right? And he's like, you told me once this town is not big enough for 2 homicidal maniacs. Well, I have news for you. I am not a maniac. Excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort. And he starts using the Joker as target practice while he's spinning him around on this grotesque wheel, just throwing scalpels into his chest. And that's why he continues on and he says, and intelligent execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. Choice, not chance, determines your destiny. I purposefully nicked several of your arteries. You are bleeding to death deep inside your body. You might have 2 or 3 hours, maybe even a day or so. Now, while he's telling them this, and this is an important thing to understand, despite how crazy the Joker looks, even with these crazy contraptions on his face, he's crying. He's terrified, right? Because Hush is one of these guys, as he is here, it's not Batman. It's not this kind of back and forth game that the Joker plays with Bruce, right? Where, Batman tracks him down and Batman arrests him and he throws him into Arkham Asylum and the Joker escapes and goes back out, kills more people, and Batman tracks him down. No. Hush is in a league of his own, right? This guy is a whole nother level of sadistic. And so that's why he just keeps on tormenting this guy, because he says, you could yell for help. Someone could come to your rescue. Let's do something about that. Unfortunately, you're in the skilled hands of an unlicensed surgeon. The Joker is going to die. If only you had a family. Who will mourn for you? So that's what's so crazy about this, is he's literally torturing this guy. Now, at that point in time, you switch back over to Batman, and Batman is really just kind of recovering from everything that had happened to a degree, and the devices inside the cowl are effectively being repaired and whatnot. But it's kind of a discussion between Batman and Nightwing and Barbara Gordon, because they tell him, right? Barbara says, your signal dropped out. I've been trying to reestablish contact. And that's where Nightwing says, but either you or we were being jammed. Somebody didn't want us to communicate. And that's where Batman says, stop, right? We've been compromised, initiating lockdown. And so Batman goes back into the cave and sees the Joker's shoe, right? And he says, I do not believe in luck. The Joker's shoe. The sole was stained, a combination of sawdust, diesel oil, mud, and animal dung, the making of a circus. As there is no circus in town, that leaves this abandoned amusement park. Visitors were recent. The Joker's hacienda. The shoe was left with intent, a ticket. And so as he goes through here, in a lot of ways, it's kind of repeating some of these moments from the Killing Joke. Now, for those of the guys who are unfamiliar with the Batman mythos, the Killing Joke is one of the most iconic and important stories ever written in Batman. And some will say it is the most important and the most iconic. It was the closest you ever got to an origin of the Joker. But the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of the imagery that's being shown here is Batman's running through this whole crazy scene and eventually locates the Joker, is that it shows imagery of Jim Gordon when he was being tormented by the Joker in the Killing Joke. It shows the images of Barbara Gordon after she had been shot, the images that Joker showed Commissioner Gordon as he was taking him through this amusement park in the Killing Joke. And then of course it shows the death of Jason Todd. But the whole point about this is that Batman starts to realize the Joker was only a pawn. He says, poisoning the reservoir dated our first encounter. How long I have tolerated his existence, the pain he's inflicted, not just on me, but on the ones I care for. Finally, he lies dying. Only one man could or would do this. One man with the knowledge of who I am and what I believe in, who has the skills to execute what he sees as a game. My childhood friend and world-renowned surgeon, Thomas Elliot. Hush has returned. Now, full transparency here. Here's one of the issues when it came to the story, as interesting as it is. A lot of people would argue that Batman was written in a very uncharacteristic way. And I say that as a preface for not just what's happened so far, but what actually happens next. But what Batman actually does is he gathers the Joker and then takes him to Dr. Leslie Tompkins. Now again, we've mentioned this before, but it could just bear repeating for those who were new. Leslie Tompkins is kind of like the underground nurse, right? The person that Batman goes to whenever he needs help. She's also a very close friend of the family, and she knows who he is. She knows he's Bruce Wayne. But when the Joker gets in here, right, Batman not being able to bring himself to let the Joker die or to even kill the Joker outright, Batman says, this guy needs medical attention. Now, the response of Leslie Tompkins is, there's no way that I can handle this, right? The amount of damage this guy's body has sustained, right? The nicks and artery damage and so on and so forth, it's more than I can do. But the response of Batman, someone needs to do something. And I cannot take this man to a hospital. The Joker Being taken to a hospital? No. And I certainly cannot be seen with him. But the fact is, Leslie Tompkins says, I don't have the tools. I can do what I can, where I can, but the reality is I don't have the tools to tend to this guy the way that I need to. And so once the Joker starts to come to, she's like, we need some kind of like a bat gas or whatever it is that you have in your utility belt that can basically knock this guy out. And that's exactly what they do, right? They put the Joker out, he's left unconscious, and then she just tells him, go take a seat. And so you get this kind of moment where Batman almost kind of recollects on what it is that he's doing here, right? Because for Bruce Wayne, the Joker is the perfect representation of every problem that the city of Gotham has. And I'm not talking about that in terms of the fact that like the Joker causes so many issues. No, metaphorically, right? Human chaos, people bending to their darkest wills. The Joker is the physical manifestation of all of those things. And I would go so far as to argue that on some level, Batman probably believes if he can fix the Joker, he can quote unquote fix Gotham. Now, whether or not those two things go hand in hand in his mind is anybody's guess. But he kind of toys with this, right? He says, I made a promise to rid my city of the evil in the form of the Joker. But that's when he's woken up by Leslie Tompkins. And she's like, look, here's the thing. Whatever it was that you gave the Joker on the way here probably saved his life, and that's great. But the reality is he needs to be taken somewhere else. What I've done here is a stopgap. I've got him in basically a coma, but he needs real, true medical treatment. I mean, she says like his jaw alone is wired shut, requiring intravenous feeding. And that's where Batman's like, he's not welcome anywhere. And she's like, well, I mean, what about Arkham? And he's like, if you take him there, if he goes to Arkham right now, he's gonna die. Whether because the orderlies kill him or because the other villains out there finally see their chance to get rid of the Joker, someone's going to take his life. And her response, then there's only one place that leads you. And that leaves Batman taking the Joker to the Batcave. Now, this is kind of cool because very rarely does the Joker ever actually enter the Batcave for any reason. And in fact, one of the most notable instances of that happening was during Scott Snyder's run in the New 52, where basically the Joker seemingly learned the identities of the Bat family because he snuck into the Batcave. And even Batman was in denial of the fact that it happened, but he had to face the fact that seemingly it did, right? The Joker figured out his identities and everybody else's. But that's when he kind of hits on this idea of how he should have handled this whole situation. Because he says, I could have dumped you in the bay, found a furnace, an open grave, or just left you to die. But I will not do what Hush wants. He thinks this is a game, that we are at war. I am not losing this conflict because Hush wants Joker to die. Now, again, it is all part of the bigger game that Hush plays, and that's the nature of his character. For those of you guys who don't know, right, Hush in the original story used almost all of Batman's enemies against him, even going so far as to have Poison Ivy ensnare Superman. But the fact is that Hush plays these very intricate, long games designed to either break Batman or potentially even expose him to the world as being this guy who's not much of a superhero. The problem with this, and this is why this story, despite the fact that it's in the main Batman comics, is actually better treated as being an alternate reality story than in the main Batman universe, is because there are things that happen here that don't really make sense. For example, he says, there was a time when I thought it was grease paint, like a clown, hoping I could wipe it off and reveal his hidden face. But some kind of chemical has erased his pigmentation on a cellular level, almost as if it were dead. No fingerprints, more effects from the chemicals? He doesn't really know. He says, or something more unimaginable that he did to himself. His feet, no prints either. Who would care if you just disappeared? The issue with this is that it gives the impression that Batman doesn't know these things, that Batman doesn't know that the Joker has no fingerprints, that Batman doesn't know he has no toe prints, that he doesn't know why the Joker's skin is bleached white and his nails have changed color. Batman's known these things for years in DC Comics. He's known pretty much everything there is to know about the Joker. So suddenly being in this situation where he doesn't know any of this stuff, it just doesn't quite add up. More so than that, there is a moment here where Jason Todd shows up. And as best I can understand it, this pissed Jason Todd fans off to no end, because what ended up happening is that as the two of them meet, Batman asks the question, how did you get in here? And the response of Jason Todd, I know how you think. You would never put yourself in a locked room without an exit. Your exit is my entrance. And that's where Batman says, if you know me as well as you claim, then you know my cowl is reinforced. If you fire, your gun will jam, ricochet, or even explode. And that's where Jason Todd points the gun at the Joker and says he's not bulletproof. And Batman literally goes to stop him. Now, there is a kind of power grid failure when it, shoots the power systems and so on and so forth. But Batman goes on this bit of a monologue again. He says his voice is muffled by that mask. I have to know for certain. Tommy has brought out this piece on the board before. This feels different. This time, my attacker moves exactly like the real one would. The hard charge right at me, like a rook in chess, forward and backwards. Need the unanticipated, the fastest, most effective way. Just crease him. I thought that we had made amends. Now, this is what's kind of pissing people off at the moment, both Batman fans and Jason Todd fans, because Batman shoots him in the head after Jason Todd wanted to kill the Joker. Now, the other reason why this seems to frustrate Jason Todd fans so much is because when Batman refers to the idea that Hush had put this piece on the board before, in the original Hush storyline, Jason Todd seemed to return. And that was one of the ways in which Hush had tormented Batman, right? That Jason Todd had died in Death in the Family, right? It was a great big huge to-do. It was written by Jim Starlin, and you guys all know the story behind how that happened most likely, right? The guy who phoned in by tricking the system, and basically the votes were cast in favor of killing Jason. And so that had always kind of been like the biggest failure of Batman, right? The fact that he had not been able to be there when Joker killed Jason Todd. When Jason showed up in Hush, it actually turned out to be Clayface. It was a huge ruse. But DC used that as a test to see how receptive fans would be to Jason Todd actually returning. And so he did, right? During the events of Infinite Crisis, or because of Infinite Crisis, when Superboy Prime punched and shattered reality and then reset all of continuity. And so when that took place, Jason Todd reappeared really in one of his most significant roles with Under the Red Hood. And killing the Joker is like the one thing he wanted. There was like this really, really good moment in the story when he really confronts Batman and says, why didn't you kill Joker after he killed me? Right? Why did you let him get away with it? Why did you just toss him into Arkham, hoping he could get better? Did my death mean nothing to you? And so the biggest problem with that, as great as that story was, is that since Under the Red Hood, there has been a lot of development for the character of Jason Todd. So much so that it all seemed to move past all that stuff. And that's really what Batman says, right? I thought we had made amends. What bothers Jason Todd fans is that all that development seems to get thrown away because Jason Todd isn't really in a place anymore where he needs to kill the Joker. The Joker has to die. He's moved past all that stuff, and now he's just kind of out doing his own thing. But still, right, once Batman sees the face of Jason and realizes that it really is him, he says, I know all about Clayface and how he impersonated me. Games you played with Tommy Elliott, like tonight. So again, it's one of these weird things because it kind of seems like this story is a direct sequel to the events of the original Hush, not just in name, but like almost immediately after Hush happened. And so in a lot of ways, stories like Heart of Hush, things like that, don't really seem to matter as far as this story is concerned. It's wiping all those things away. And so that's why it's better to look at this as either some kind of an alternate reality story or a story that basically takes place years ago, right? Like almost immediately after Hush, and we're just now seeing it. But again, the fact is that Batman, in seeing this, Jason Todd says, drop the gun. We both know that you're never going to shoot, but I will. I'm going to finish what I came here to do. And Batman's immediate question, have you been talking to Tommy? And that's where he's like, to Hush? Drop the gun. He doesn't necessarily say no. And so Batman says, you are not angry at the Joker. He was only the blunt instrument, like the crowbar he hit you with, which is a statement that makes no sense whatsoever, right? It's like going to Batman and saying, well, it wasn't Joe Chill who killed your parents. It was the gun. Well, I mean, somebody had to pick it up and pull the trigger. The gun didn't just shoot on its own, right? So, I mean, it's that kind of thing. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I guess there is some way you could square that circle, but again, it seems very out of character. Fortunately, this is about as far out of character character as we get, right? After a while, it kind of reverts back to what it should be. But again, a lot of what Jason Todd wants is to kill the Joker. And so Batman, realizing that there's no way he's going to stop, literally has to fight him, right? He has to fight Jason Todd, which is kind of cool because he says, I know it's the truth, Jason, because I feel the same way. You were my partner, my Robin. You were also so young. I should never have put you in harm's way. If I did, then it was my job to protect you, mine and mine alone. And that's where Jason Todd kind of lashes out. How could you save the Joker's life? Of all the things that you could have done, how could you save his life? Now, this is where things, again, kind of snap back to normal, because you could easily look at this and you could say, okay, so Jason Todd had moved past all of this until word had reached his ears that Batman had intentionally saved the life of Joker, right? It's one thing for Batman to say, I'm not going to go out of my way and kill the Joker maliciously and in cold blood because he killed you. That is something that I just cannot do. Right? I just cannot do that. It's too far out of my moral compass. It's another to just let the Joker die because he was already dying. And so I imagine on some level, Jason Todd looks at this and sees Batman's actions as being identical to Batman learning that Joker's dying of cancer. And then say, okay, well, we got to make sure we get him into chemotherapy and we got to go through all these things in order to save his life because the Joker can't die. Regardless of what Batman's motivations are, that he doesn't want to play into the hands of Hush or anything like that, for Jason, it's irrelevant. It feels like a massive betrayal. And so that, I think, is how you really square this circle. And that's how you make this whole story stick when it comes to Jason. Now, whether or not fans want to hear that, I don't know. But again, at the end of this, what you do is you switch back over to Nightwing and to Barbara Gordon, where the two of them are talking. And he says, tell me again, how did he get in here? And she says, I let him in. Now, of course, they're not talking about Jason Todd. They're not talking about the Joker. They're talking about somebody else. And that's where Nightwing says, well, what about the lockdown, right? He knows where you live. And she says, he's a lot smarter than you or anyone gives him credit for. I know what that feels like. And she says, if what he's saying is true, and my intuition is that it is, we can only trust each other now. And so that's when you find out the person they're talking to is the Riddler. And that's when he tells them, you guys are going to need all the help that you can get. You, Dick Grayson, as well as Barbara, and even Bruce Wayne. So the fact that, like, the Riddler knows their identities is huge. This is a pretty big deal, right? It's always kind of been a stickler that, like, the Riddler doesn't seem to know exactly who they are. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. In his own way, it is very much akin to that iconic scene, again, from Scott Snyder's New 52 Batman, where Bruce Wayne confronts the Joker in Arkham Asylum and really kind of asks the question, do you know who I am? And the test is to see whether or not Joker actually knows who Bruce Wayne is. Joker, of course, clearly knew, but Joker pretended like he didn't. So it was kind of that little bit of a back and forth game between the two of them. With the Riddler, it was very much the same way, right? Maybe he really does kind of know, or maybe he really doesn't necessarily know. DC flips back and forth with their stories, right? Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. But again, it's this moment where they have to work with a bad guy in order to figure out what's going on with Hush and how his big, huge plan is unfolding. And so Batman, basically coming to after, having it handed to him by Jason Todd, ends up getting back to where the Joker was at and realizing the Joker's been taken, right? Jason Todd took him away, most likely to execute him. And so what Batman does is he goes back and he looks at the surveillance system to see what happened between the moment he was knocked out and when Jason Todd, of course, took the Joker, only to find out that Hush was there. And seemingly, Hush and Jason really are working together here. And so in the midst of this, right, with Batman basically unconscious, Hush chimes in and he says, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Now, of course, Jason Todd doesn't have time for any of this nonsense. He's like, why in the world are you whispering? We're the only ones here. It's annoying, man. Talk normally. But Hush simply says, you did what needed to be done. And Jason's response, no. Right? This is where it ends. And he goes to execute the Joker right there. And Hush immediately jumps in, throws a scalpel right down the barrel of the gun and is like, no, right? This is just the beginning. We have been over this again and again and again. We need the Joker alive so everyone can see the choice that Batman made to save the Joker's life when he didn't save yours. Give me the gun so I can take the scalpel out. And so, of course, Jason Todd does it on his own. And so Hush responds and he says, we both know you need my help. These fits of rage, the cerebral pain you're hiding, your brain is deteriorating. There was just too much damage, even for the Lazarus pit to repair. Curious, though, that as you lay dying in his arms, he didn't think to call me, his childhood friend and the best brain surgeon in the world. When Bruce cracked his own skull open, mine was the first number he dialed. Now, of course, Jason Todd isn't really buying into it. And this is one of the things that makes Jason such an intriguing and amazing character. Because of stories like Under the Red Hood, we as the fan base were introduced to what Jason Todd looks like when he's effectively a villain and how capable he is. And so the question becomes, is Jason Todd playing the role of a good guy or a bad guy? Is he a double agent, quote unquote, working alongside Hush in order to gain Hush's confidence and then ultimately turn on them? Or is he just taking this opportunity, right? Did Hush bring him along with this idea of you can have the Joker and then we can just take things from there, right? How does this all tie together? And so what ends up happening is, of course, Hush destroys the surveillance cameras, at least the ones watching their immediate vicinity. And then it switches over to Commissioner Gordon, because at that point he says, Jim Gordon stopped me from killing the Joker one night, another one of Hush's games. I wonder what he will think when he learns what I've done. And so when Commissioner Gordon arrives in his place, he finds basically a tablet, right? An iPad, right? Sitting there on the table. And it just says a friend, right? And it's just a little video. And once he starts playing, it says, welcome back, my friend, to the show that never ends. This is quite a pickle. Let's just say you left me here to die. Croak. Kick the bucket, since, you know, it's not like you did the deed. Who would know? Except for you. And it's basically video footage of Batman saving the Joker's life. And so at that point, Commissioner Gordon is like, enough. He goes to turn it off and there's a massive explosion. The whole thing blows up. Now, it doesn't look like he's dead, but it certainly looks like he is injured. And so at that point, you switch back over to Nightwing, Barbara, and the Riddler. And at that point, Nightwing's just kind of like, okay, so not only do you know Batman's personal identity, the Riddler says, I know yours and Bab's. In fact, all of your Bat family secrets, I know them all. And that's what the question's asked. How can we possibly trust you? Right? If you have all of our personal information, I guess maybe the fact that you haven't dumped it on the internet or out there in the world is reason enough for us to trust you. But like, why would we trust you? And that's where the Riddler's like, what time is it when an elephant sits on a fence? And they're just kind of like, what are you talking about? And he just says, never mind, right? I'd be more concerned that if I know, then who else knows? And the response of Nightwing, Hush has to know. None of us are safe. I have to get to Jason. Now again, some uncharacteristic writing here, because that's when the Riddler says going there is exactly what Hush wants. You have to stay together. The response of Nightwing, I don't really care what it is that Hush wants. Tell me where Jason is. And the question of the Riddler, how can you be in two places at once? And at that moment, Barbara basically gets a kind of indicator of the explosion at her father's house. And so she, of course, takes off to go deal with all of that. And so Nightwing responds to the riddle of the Joker and he says, you can't unless there are two of you. And the response of the Riddler, each of you has at least one person you care about deeply, an Achilles heel. That's where he'll apply the pressure. And so you pick up with Batman basically tracking down Wayne Med Tower, which of course is where the scalpel led him to. There is a fight that breaks out between himself and basically another person, and that's where he starts to realize that what Hush is doing here is not what he did before. He's not using the various villains of Batman's rogues gallery against him in a variety of different ways. Instead, he's building his own army using his surgical abilities for any number of effects. And in fact, in the middle of this fight, when Batman is trying to find Hush, Silence shows up, and Silence literally starts talking, and it just kind of blasts into Batman's head enough that it incapacitates him. At that moment, Nightwing finds Jason Todd at Gotham City Lighthouse, where Jason intends to execute the Joker. So a fight breaks out between the two of them. And the fight is pretty brutal. I don't necessarily know who would actually win in a fight between Nightwing and Jason Todd, mostly because Dick Grayson's been around for damn near 100 years, right? There's a lot of history there, man, a lot of fight sequences. So I don't know. I'll leave it to the power scalers and let them cook the books on who they think would win in a fight between these two guys. But Nightwing, ever being the more practical of the two, tries to talk Jason Todd down and telling him, like, you're being manipulated by Hush. That's really what's going on here at its most basic core. But in the middle of this whole fight, the Joker wakes up, fires off a couple of shots, and is like, I've wanted to use this line for such a long time. Which one of you is faster than a speeding bullet? Because he's just standing there with two guns pointed directly at them. At that point, you switch back over to Batman, and literally Silence is talking to him and saying, you will fail. But because of the nature of his voice and the fact that it just literally overwhelms Bruce Wayne, the only alternative he has is to put on an audio block, which basically takes away the abilities of Silence. And Batman goes on the physical attack, which does nothing whatsoever. He's like, it's like hitting a brick wall, right? Harder than a brick wall. It's almost like fighting Superman. It doesn't really do any good whatsoever. And so that's why he says, whoever or whatever he is, I have to move now. Well, in the middle of that, Damian Wayne comes crashing into the building with Bane. Because apparently Damian Wayne has allied with Bane, which seems kind of weird considering the fact that Bane killed Alfred. You'd think that like Damian Wayne would hate him. There's so many comic book creators on TikTok that have been talking about that recently. Yes, I'm back on TikTok, but there are so many people who've been talking about that. It's like the one thing that people can't really seem to get past. But still, Bane is here, and in turn, Bane starts facing off against Silence. But the one question that Batman has through all of this, right? He says, Damian, with Bane, have to risk being able to hear what it is that he's saying. So he turns the audio block off and he says, who can I trust in all of this? Every maneuver is calculated, exactly how Tommy plays. This is what he does. He plays these games and these tricks. And I don't know if Damian Wayne working alongside Bane is something he's doing of his own accord, or if it's because Hush has moved pieces around in such a way to make sure this happens. That's the danger in facing off against someone like Hush. If you're Batman and you're walking along this path that will clearly lead you to whatever it is, whatever outcome Hush is hoping for, right? Batman's death. And Batman says, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to step to the right. Then Batman doesn't know if Hush expects him to step to the right, and that's all part of the plan. Or if it's outside the plan of Hush. He really is one of these villains that just fills you with paranoia, right? It's one of the greatest aspects of Hush as a character, because in the midst of all of this, Batman just starts throwing these erroneous accusations at Damian Wayne. And he's like, why are you here with Bane, right? Has Hush gotten to him? Is Damian Wayne now an ally of Hush? What's going on here, right? And so that's why Batman says, I do not need your help. Bane, do not let him speak. Do not let Silence say anything. But in the middle of that, this voice just comes out and says, check, right? And it's literally Hush with a scalpel to the neck of Damian. And he says, it's a shame that you cannot be in two places at once. You have other knights in jeopardy. Any way you play this, Bruce, 3 Robins die tonight. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end, and this is only the first part, right? We still have the whole second part, which we have to wait 3 months for it to finish. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.